The Dark Ledger. A crime story in 7 chapters. Prologue. A seed in silicon. Ways. There is a saying among those who work in law enforcement's cybercrime division. The internet never forgets, and neither do we. This is the story of William Adeyemi, a boy who was brilliant enough to build an empire and foolish enough to think brilliance was the same thing as wisdom. It is a story about money, ambition, betrayal, and the slow, inevitable collapse of a world built on lies. It is also a story about a pizza. Remember the pizza. It matters. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Knew Too Much and Did Too Little. Coventry, England, September 2019. The flat at 14 B. Raglan Street, Coventry, CV13ER, smelled like instant noodles, cigarette smoke that drifted in from the floor below, and the particular staleness of a room where curtains are rarely opened. 3 empty energy drink cans stood in a pyramid on the windowsill, not as decoration, but because their owner hadn't gotten around to throwing them away in 11 days. William Adeyemi, 22 years old, third-year computer science student at Coventry University, was lying on his bed at 2:17 in the afternoon, staring at the ceiling. He had one lecture at noon. He had not attended it. William was not unintelligent. His professors, in the rare moments when he showed up, noted that he grasped concepts quickly: networking architecture, cryptographic theory, back-end systems design. His first-year grades had been strong. His second-year grades had been acceptable. His third-year grades so far were a quiet disaster. He was 5'11", lean in the way that comes from forgetting to eat rather than exercising, with close-cropped hair and sharp cheekbones that gave him the look of someone perpetually slightly suspicious of whatever he was looking at. He dressed well when he went out. He cared about appearance in public. But inside the flat, he existed in gray joggers and a worn Arsenal hoodie that had seen better years. His laptop was open on the desk across from him. On the screen, an unfinished assignment on distributed systems due in 4 days. Beside the laptop, an unopened textbook. Beside the textbook, his phone. He reached for the phone. He opened Instagram. 40 minutes later, he was still on his phone, but he had migrated from Instagram to YouTube, where he had fallen into a rabbit hole that would change his life in ways he was not yet equipped to understand. It started with a video titled, "How I Made £4,000 Last Month from My Laptop, Legit Methods." He watched it with the skepticism of a CS student. He knew how these things worked. He understood affiliate marketing and dropshipping and the basic architecture of online money-making schemes. But he was bored. And he was broke. His student loan had been partially spent on a pair of trainers he had convinced himself were an investment in his personal brand. His parents, back in Peckham, South London, sent him £200 a month and asked, with increasing frequency and decreasing subtlety, when exactly he was planning to graduate. The YouTube video led to another video. That one led to a Reddit thread. The Reddit thread led through a sequence of clicks that felt casual at the time and momentous only in retrospect to a forum on the surface web where people discussed, in thinly veiled language, the economics of the darknet. William read for 3 hours. He didn't do his assignment. But the thing about William, the thing his mother always said and his friends both admired and found exhausting, was that when something actually captured his interest, he became a different person entirely. Not lazy, not distracted, focused, almost frighteningly so, with the kind of single-pointed concentration that in another direction might have built something genuinely great. By 11 p.m. that night, he had read everything he could find on the surface web about the Silk Road. about Ross Ulbricht, who had built a $100 million drug marketplace from a library in San Francisco before the FBI knocked on the door, about the Alpha Bay shutdown, about Hansa, about the operational security mistakes, the breadcrumbs left behind, the human errors, the moments of arrogance that had brought each one down. He read it all the way a medical student reads case studies, not just the outcome, but the mechanism. Not just what happened, but why, and crucially, what they should have done instead. He fell asleep at 3 a.m. with his phone on his chest and a single thought forming like a crystal in his mind. They got caught because they got sloppy. I wouldn't get sloppy. Chapter 2. Architecture of a Bad Idea. October 2019, 3 weeks later. The idea didn't become a decision overnight. It percolated. William went to a few more lectures, not because he'd developed a sudden respect for academic obligation, but because he needed access to the university's faster internet connection and the library's isolated study booths. He began researching. First, Tor, the onion routing network. He already knew the basics from his networking module, but he went deeper now, understanding the layered encryption, the exit nodes, the way traffic was bounced across relays to obscure origin points. He set up a Tor browser on a cheap secondary laptop he bought secondhand from a Facebook marketplace listing in Coventry city center for £65 cash. Second, Monero. Not Bitcoin. He'd read enough postmortems to know that Bitcoin's blockchain was a liability. Monero's privacy architecture, the ring signatures and stealth addresses, was designed from the ground up to resist the kind of blockchain analysis that had helped investigators trace Silk Road transactions. He spent a week understanding it properly. Third, operational security. No personal details anywhere. No logins from his home IP. A VPN layered under Tor on those occasions when he accessed the network from somewhere other than the library. No mentions on any account connected to his real name. He was building the theory of the thing before he built the thing itself. And the theory, he told himself, was educational. He was just learning. He wasn't committed to anything. He was, of course, completely committed to everything. By November 2019, he had built a working prototype. He had named the site PharmaGhost, partly because he liked the sound of it, partly because it was generic enough to avoid drawing attention from search indexers that occasionally crawled .onion directories. The site lived at a 56-character .onion address that looked like a line of random noise. G7R2MXQ4PH19, ANSL8, KVWZ 5DTNC 6YJP0B3 USRO2E1FUMHQW8 CXA7VSD.onion. He'd written it himself, a custom PHP backend with a PostgreSQL database, running on a rented server paid for with Monero through an intermediary service. The server was physically located in Iceland, a country with some of the world's most data privacy-friendly hosting laws. He'd set up his own warrant canary, a simple notice that would change if he was ever served with a legal demand, a standard darknet operational procedure. The site was simple in design, dark background, clean layout, a sparse product catalog, a PGP encrypted messaging system for buyer-seller communication, an escrow system. He held funds until buyers confirmed receipt of goods to prevent seller exit scams. It looked, in other words, like it had been built by someone who knew what they were doing. Because it had been. The first product listed was cannabis. Just cannabis, sourced locally. William had connections in Coventry that he'd cultivated loosely over 2 years, the way university students sometimes do, casually and without much thought for the long-term implications. He had a supplier named Dre. He never knew Dre's last name, didn't ask, who operated out of a flat in the Hillfields area of the city on Primrose Hill Street, and who sold in quantities that William now began purchasing slightly more deliberately. He repackaged everything himself in his flat. Vacuum-sealed bags inside padded envelopes. He used a printer in a library in Birmingham, an hour's train journey, paying cash, to print the address labels. The return addresses were fictional properties that nonetheless existed on real streets, so they wouldn't trigger immediate suspicion if a postal worker glanced at them. First month, 6 orders, small, locals only, each one delivered via Royal Mail, dropped at different post offices across Coventry and Leamington Spa. Nothing happened. Nobody got caught. The money arrived in Monero, and William converted it through a series of exchanges into cash at Bitcoin ATMs, moving small amounts to stay under the reporting threshold, then depositing it into a prepaid card he used for expenses. Second month, 17 orders. Third month, 31. He was making more money than he had ever made in his life. He was also, without quite acknowledging it to himself, running a criminal enterprise from a flat on Raglan Street that still smelled like instant noodles. Chapter 3. Enter the Algorithm. January 2020. His name was Kofi Mensah, and he was, objectively, the better programmer. They had met at a summer hackathon in Birmingham in 2018. Kofi representing the University of Birmingham's Computer Science Department, William representing Coventry's, both of them part of teams that failed to win but succeeded in spending the entire night arguing about back-end architecture while everyone else slept. They had exchanged numbers and maintained a sporadic friendship since then. Occasional messages, a few meetups in Birmingham's Chinatown on Hurst Street, shared opinions on programming languages and football. Kofi was 23. He was methodical, where William was instinctive, thorough, where William was quick. He had the kind of face that people immediately trusted, broad and open, with a ready smile and attentive dark eyes behind wire-framed glasses. He was finishing his master's degree at Birmingham, specializing in system security, which William now thought was either a problem or a resource, depending on how the next conversation went. They met at a Costa Coffee on New Street, Birmingham, B24QA, on a gray January morning. William arrived first, ordered 2 flat whites, and spent 8 minutes deciding exactly how to start the conversation. He had decided finally on honesty. Not complete honesty, but structural honesty. "I've built something," he said when Kofi sat down. "It's making money, real money, but it's getting too big for me to manage on my own." Kofi stirred his coffee. "What kind of something?" "An online marketplace." A pause. Kofi had read enough, knew enough about William's particular skill set and work ethic, the combination of genuine technical ability and profound reluctance to apply it conventionally, to sense the shape of what was coming. "What kind of marketplace, William?" It wasn't a question. "Not really." William told him. "Not everything, but enough. The site, the structure, the money." He quoted figures, monthly revenue now approaching £15,000 and growing. He described the architecture with the enthusiasm of a man who had genuinely built something he was proud of, which made it stranger and more troubling to listen to. Kofi was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said. "Just hear." "I heard you. No." William nodded as if he had expected this, and then proceeded to talk for 20 more minutes. He talked about the security architecture, the Monero system, the server location, the operational procedures. He talked about the money with the precision of someone who had been doing nothing but thinking about it for months. He talked about what Kofi's role would be, managing the back end, improving the escrow system, building out features he didn't have time to build himself. He named a figure, £4,000 per month, transferred in Monero for roughly 15 hours of work per week. Kofi looked at his coffee for a while. "I'm not touching anything that involves other people getting hurt," he said finally. "If you're selling anything that—" "Cannabis and pills," William said. "Recreational. Nothing that—" "You don't get to make that call." Another silence. 4,000, Kofi said. 4,000 per month, transferred clean. Kofi looked out the window at New Street, at the gray Birmingham morning, at a bus advertising a sale at John Lewis. He thought about his student debt, his mother's mortgage, the master's degree that had turned out to cost substantially more than the funding covered. "I'm not doing anything that ships outside the UK," he said, "and if you ever list anything harder than what you told me, I'm out immediately, no conversation." "Agreed. And I want veto power over any security decision that affects the site's exposure." "Done." Kofi picked up his coffee. "God help us," he said quietly. Then, "Show me the code base." Chapter 4. The Growth. February to August 2020. What Kofi brought to PharmaGhost was what William had always lacked: discipline. He rewrote the escrow system entirely, fixing 3 vulnerabilities that would have allowed a sophisticated buyer to manipulate confirmation states and potentially drain the held funds. He implemented automated PGP key rotation, forcing vendors— William had begun allowing third-party vendors on the platform by March, taking a 15% commission— to re-verify their encryption credentials every 30 days. He set up a deadman switch. If neither of them logged into the administrative backend for 14 consecutive days, the site would begin an automated shutdown sequence, deleting logs and overwriting the database. "Deadman switch," William had said when Kofi proposed it. "That's dark." "That's the point," Kofi said. "The people running Silk Road didn't have one. When Ulbricht got arrested at the library, the FBI walked right into a live session. They had everything. We are not doing that." William had nodded. He respected Kofi's paranoia. He relied on it increasingly as a counterweight to his own tendency to assume things would be fine. Through the spring and summer of 2020, as the world contracted into lockdowns and delivery services expanded accordingly, PharmaGhost grew. The lockdown, counterintuitively, was good for business. People were at home. People were anxious. Postal services were overwhelmed enough that additional packages attracted less scrutiny than usual. The vendor base expanded. By May 2020, there were 11 independent vendors operating on the platform, shipping primarily across Coventry, Birmingham, Leicester, and Nottingham. PharmaGhost had found its niche, a regional operation, never trying to be global, never drawing the kind of attention that came with high-profile international shipping. Monthly revenue broke £60,000 in June. William moved out of the flat on Raglan Street. He took a lease on a nicer place in the Earlsdon area of Coventry, 37 Hartington Crescent, CV56GG. A Victorian terraced house that he furnished expensively and tastefully, and explained to the few people who visited by saying he'd been doing freelance development work. His wardrobe improved dramatically. He bought a watch. He bought a car. A black Mercedes-Benz C-Class, registered to a holding company he'd set up with the help of a formation agent he'd found online, paying cash through a complex route that he was dimly aware was probably technically money laundering, but tried not to think about too carefully. Kofi continued to work remotely from Birmingham, accessing the site's administrative functions exclusively through the university library's Tor-enabled connection. He had, he told himself, very strict rules. He kept them mostly. They spoke twice a week on an encrypted signal line for no longer than 20 minutes. They had agreed never to meet in person once the site became operational. They had agreed not to discuss specifics over any channel that wasn't end-to-end encrypted. They had agreed on a code language for their conversations. The site was the project, vendors were clients, drugs were inventory, and the police were the weather. They were careful. They were also, without quite realizing it, beginning to feel invincible. Chapter 5. The weather changes. September 2020, Coventry and Birmingham Police Cybercrime Unit. Detective Sergeant Priya Nair was 38 years old, had been with the Regional Organized Crime Unit for 6 years, and had the particular gift of noticing patterns in places where other people noticed noise. She had first seen a reference to PharmaGhost in a report from Coventry City Police's Drug Squad in July 2020, a small note in a larger document about regional supply chains, flagging that several recently arrested street-level dealers in the Hillfields and Stoke areas of Coventry had mentioned acquiring product through an app or website rather than traditional supply routes. This was not unusual. Darknet purchasing had been increasing for years. What was unusual was how many separate references there were, from separate individuals who hadn't spoken to each other, all gesturing toward the same source. She requested the full interviews. She read them 3 times. Then she started pulling threads. By August, with the help of the unit's cyber analyst, D.C. Marcus Webb, 29 economics degree before joining the force, the kind of obsessive who kept 3 separate notebooks and color-coded his case files. They had identified the .onion address from a screenshotted message on a seized phone belonging to a dealer who had been arrested in Leamington Spa. They set up accounts. They made small purchases. Cannabis delivered in 8 days to a controlled address, vacuum-sealed and tucked inside what appeared to be a greetings card. The product was real. The operation was real. And the site's security, Nair noted with professional respect, was substantially better than most of what she saw in this space. "This is not a teenager with a laptop," she told her superintendent in a briefing on 14th September 2020 at the ROCU's offices on Little Park Street, Coventry, CV12JX. "This is someone who understands what they're doing. The escrow system is custom-built. The PGP implementation is correct, which, believe me, is rarer than you'd think. Whoever built this has read the post-mortems on every major darknet seizure and built accordingly." "Can we crack it?" the superintendent asked. "Not technically," Nair said. "We go in through the human element. We always do." She was right about where the vulnerability was. It wasn't the code. It was the money and the pride. In October 2020, a buyer registered on PharmaGhost and made contact through the encrypted messaging system. The handle was bluestar_88. The buyer expressed interest in acquiring a very large amount of MDMA, specifically 2 kilograms, for distribution at a series of events planned for the following spring. The price, at the current Monero rate and PharmaGhost's pricing structure, worked out to approximately £84,000. William looked at the message for a long time. He forwarded it to Kofi via Signal. "This real?" Kofi wrote back. "Looks like it. Could be weather. Their code for police." Could be. But the account history is clean. 3 previous purchases, all confirmed, all reviewed. Been on the platform 4 months? A pause. Then, "Still could be weather." William considered this. He knew the risk. He had always known the risk. He had built the entire system around minimizing it. But £84,000 was, in one transaction, more than they made in a month. And there was something else. Something that Kofi had always worried about, and William had never quite been able to excise from his personality. William liked being the man behind something big. He liked knowing he had built this. He liked the significance of it. He typed back, "I want to meet them." A long pause from Kofi. "Longer than usual." That's the worst idea you've ever had. It's an £84,000 order. It's also the thing that every person who ever ran one of these sites said right before they got arrested. I'll be careful. William. He had already started drafting the message to Bluestar_88. Chapter 6. The Meeting. Thursday, 5th November, 2020. 11:30 a.m. The location William had chosen for the meeting was a cafe called Grounds and Grace on Hay Lane, Coventry, CV15RF, a small independent place with exposed brick walls, specialty coffee, and enough ambient noise from the background music and the espresso machine to make quiet conversation private. He had chosen it because it was central, because he knew it, and because there were two exits, the front on Hay Lane and a side door through to an alleyway that ran parallel to the street. He had noted the exits. He felt prepared. He arrived in the Mercedes, the black C-Class which he had driven himself, parking on a meter on Earl Street, and walked the 200 meters to the cafe at a comfortable pace in a long wool coat, dark trousers, clean trainers. He looked, to anyone observing, like a young professional taking a meeting. Detective Sergeant Priya Nair, seated in an unmarked Volvo on Hay Lane with Detective Constable Webb, watched him walk past through a directional camera mounted inside the vehicle's dashboard. "That's him," Webb said quietly. Nair said nothing. She pressed the radio. "Sierra 1 to all units. Subject has arrived on foot. Black Mercedes C-Class. Partial plate confirmed. Parked Earl Street. Subject entering the location now. All units hold. Repeat, all units hold." Inside Grounds and Grace, the undercover officer, DC Amara Osei, 26, 2 years in undercover operations, excellent at appearing calm in rooms where the floor was about to drop, was sitting at a corner table with a flat white and a copy of a novel she wasn't reading. She had arrived 40 minutes before the meeting. She had checked the exits. She knew where the cameras were mounted, because she had been part of the team that installed 2 additional covert cameras in the cafe's light fixtures the previous evening, during a 3 a.m. operation coordinated with the cafe's owner under a non-disclosure arrangement. William walked in. He looked around the room. His eyes landed on her. She raised a hand, small, casual. He came over and sat down. For 12 minutes they talked. She was Bluestar_88. She represented, she said, a network of event promoters who had been using PharmaGhost for smaller orders and wanted to establish a larger supply relationship. She was calm and specific, and her story had no holes in it because DS Nair had spent 2 weeks building it. William was relaxed. He was, she noted in her subsequent report, charming and articulate and clearly intelligent, which made the whole thing slightly sadder than it might otherwise have been. He explained the logistics of a large order. The Monero transfer. She would need to send the full amount to an escrow address. He would provide it. Delivery would be coordinated differently than the standard postal route for an order of this size. He would use a trusted courier. She nodded. She asked clarifying questions. Good questions. She was genuinely curious about the system, which she had been studying for 2 months. At 11:51 a.m., they had finalized the terms. At 11:52 a.m., DC Osei sent a prearranged WhatsApp message to DS Nair. A single emoji, a green circle. "All units, move in. I repeat, all units move in." The Volvo on Hay Lane pulled forward. 2 unmarked cars that had been idling on Palmer Lane turned the corner. A third came from the direction of the cathedral. Inside the cafe, 3 officers in plain clothes who had been sitting at separate tables reading newspapers and laptops rose simultaneously and moved toward William's table. William had good instincts. Whatever else might be said about him, he had good instincts. He knew before anyone reached him. It was something in the way the room changed, the way DC Ose's eyes shifted one fraction of a second before she controlled them. He was on his feet before the officers were halfway to him. He ran for the side door. He made it. He hit the alleyway at a sprint, turned left toward Corporation Street, and ran directly into two uniformed officers from the outer cordon who had been positioned precisely there because D.S. Nair had a gift for anticipating where someone would run. There was a brief, violent struggle. William was fast, genuinely fast, and desperate enough to be dangerous. He got through the first officer, past the second, and a third officer, coming from the far end of the alley. Rugby tackled him to the ground. In the fall, his right leg caught the edge of a metal step protruding from a service door. The wound, a deep laceration, later requiring 12 stitches, was bleeding badly by the time he regained his feet, which he did through what seemed to witnesses like pure adrenaline-fueled determination. He was running again, limping running, bleeding onto the pavement of Corporation Street. He made it to the car on Earl Street. He had his keys. He drove. Kofi Mensah was arrested at his flat in 43 Pershore Road, Birmingham, B57NP at 11:58 a.m., 6 minutes after William ran. He opened the door, apparently assuming it was a food delivery he had ordered. He was in his dressing gown. He was holding his laptop. He looked at the officers standing in the hallway for a moment and said, quietly and with evident resignation, "I told him this would happen." He was arrested, cautioned, and taken to Lloyd House Police Station on Colmore Circus, Queensway, Birmingham, B46NQ. He did not resist. He did not say anything further of significance until he had been provided with a solicitor. His laptop, his phone, and 2 external hard drives were seized. Chapter 7. The Pizza. June 2021, 7 months later. William Adeyemi had been remarkably difficult to find. He had not gone home to his parents in Peckham. The family home on Oglander Road, SE15, was watched. He had not accessed any of the Monero wallets associated with PharmaGhost. The blockchain analysts had flagged them. He had not contacted Kofi, who had by that point pleaded guilty and was awaiting sentencing. He had not used his phone, his bank cards, or any account connected to his real identity. He had, in short, applied to his own disappearance the same operational security principles he had applied to his criminal enterprise, which was, D.S. Nair admitted to DC Webb over bad coffee in the incident room, grudgingly impressive. He was living, they eventually determined, in a bedsit in Gloucester, a city with no particular connection to him, in a building on Westgate Street, GL12NG, renting under a false name from a private landlord who hadn't run proper checks. He was using cash. He was not going out much. He had dyed his hair. He had also, and this was the thing that ended everything, the thing that became a small legend in the cybercrime unit for years afterward, developed a very strong craving for a specific pizza. There was a restaurant called Vesuvio's on Northgate Street in Gloucester, a 10-minute walk from his bedsit, that made, by most accounts, an excellent Calabrese pizza. William had been there twice in person. He liked it. He wanted it delivered. He ordered on their website. He paid with a prepaid card. He gave his address. The restaurant's delivery records were being monitored, not because anyone had specifically tracked William to Gloucester, but because D.S. Nair, after 7 months, had expanded the sweep to include delivery records in cities where William had no known connections, on the theory that someone living under a false identity might gravitate toward comfort food, toward the familiar, toward the kind of small pleasure that was difficult to entirely give up. The name on the order was Adam Clark. The address was Westgate Street. The prepaid card flagged because it had been purchased in cash at a newsagent in Gloucester, 1 week after PharmaGhost had gone offline. It wasn't proof, but it was enough for a warrant. They knocked on the door of the bedsit at 6:45 a.m. on 12th June 2021. William Adeyemi, 23 years old, with dyed hair and a month-old beard and a healing scar on his right leg, opened the door in gray joggers and a worn Arsenal hoodie. Different hoodie, same essential uniform, and looked at DS Priya Nair for a moment. She had been doing this job for 6 years. She had seen many moments like this one. She still found them, despite everything, slightly heartbreaking. The moment the thing that was running finally stops, and there is nothing left but what comes next. "William Adeyemi," she said, "I'm arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to supply controlled drugs, money laundering, and operating a criminal enterprise contrary to the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. He didn't say anything. "You don't have to say anything," she continued, "but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand?" He nodded once. "Put your shoes on," she said, not unkindly. "It's cold." Epilogue. What the court heard. At Coventry Crown Court, in proceedings that began in March 2022, the full scope of PharmaGhost's operation was laid out for the jury. Over 14 months of active operation, the site had facilitated the sale of controlled substances with a combined street value estimated at £2.3 million. At its peak, the site had 27 active vendors and had processed thousands of orders across the Midlands. The money laundering operation, while improvised, had moved approximately £640,000 in Monero through a series of exchanges before investigators were able to begin tracing its ultimate destination. Kofi Mensah pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply controlled drugs and money laundering. His cooperation with investigators, his early guilty plea, and his clear secondary role in the operation, as well as testimony regarding his initial reluctance, earned him some measure of consideration from the judge. He was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment with eligibility for parole review after 5. On the day of sentencing, his mother sat in the public gallery. She did not look at him when the sentence was read. She looked at the window. Kofi looked at his hands. William Adeyemi contested several charges before ultimately pleading guilty to the most serious counts as the weight of the digital evidence, recovered from the Icelandic server through an international legal assistance request that took 4 months but ultimately succeeded, became undeniable. He was sentenced to 16 years imprisonment with a minimum term of 8. The black Mercedes was seized under the Proceeds of Crime Act and auctioned. The flat on Hartington Crescent was searched. Behind a panel in the fitted wardrobe, investigators found £78,000 in cash, a notebook with handwritten infrastructure notes in William's handwriting, and a single prepaid Monero card. The notebook was meticulous. DS Nair read it entirely. She noted at the bottom of the last used page in small, neat handwriting, a single line that William had apparently written sometime in the early months of the operation, possibly as a reminder, possibly as a warning to himself that he had failed to take seriously. It read, "The weakest point in any system is the human being who runs it." Detective Sergeant Priya Nair received a commendation for her work on Operation Phantom Ledger, the name given to the PharmaGhost investigation. Detective Constable Marcus Webb was promoted to Detective Constable First Class. Detective Constable Amara Osei transferred to Counter-Terrorism the following year. The .onion address G7 ISR2 MXQ4 PH19 ANSL8 KVWZ 5EDTNC6 YJP 0B3 RO2E1 FUMHQW8 CXA7 VSD.onion went offline on November 5, 2020 at 11:57 a.m., 1 minute after Kofi Mensah opened his door. The dead man's switch worked exactly as designed. It was the smartest thing either of them built. It didn't save them. The end.